Hi, I'm Alex, and I'm going to be talking to those unsung heroes of Doctor Who, with brand new interviews with the likes of Lloyd Ellis, Michael Catherwood, Rocky Taylor, and many more. It starts Wednesday the 20th of May over on the YouTube channel Phantom Online. Hi, I'm Alex, and I'm going to be talking to those unsung heroes of Doctor Who, with brand new interviews with the likes of Lloyd Ellis, Michael Catherwood, Rocky Taylor, and many more. It starts Wednesday the 20th of May over on the YouTube channel Phantom Online. Hi, I'm Alex, and I'm going to be talking to those unsung heroes of Doctor Who, with brand new interviews with the likes of Lloyd Ellis, Michael Catherwood, Rocky Taylor, and many more. It starts Wednesday the 20th of May over on the YouTube channel Phantom Online.
Hello and welcome to the launch of our new interview series, The Unsung Heroes of Doctor Who. This YouTube series aims to tell the behind-the-scenes story from those members of cast and crew whose perspective might normally go untold. Tonight, we will be showcasing 4 interviews from the series looking at both the classic and current series of Doctor Who. At 8 PM, we are joined by Shauna Harrison, who provided the makeup for 3 80s stories, Terror of the Vervoids, The Ultimate Foe, and Paradise Towers. Then at 8:25, Alex interviews Lee Sheward, stunt coordinator from Doctor Who from 2005 to 2009. You can tweet along and join in the conversation using our hashtag Who's Unsung Heroes. Don't forget to click like and subscribe so you can receive notification of future episodes.
I'm joined now by a makeup designer who worked both with Colin Baker and Sylvester McCoy, and I believe has never actually spoken about Doctor Who. So I would like to introduce Shauna Harrison. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you very much. No, I actually haven't really been interviewed about Doctor Who. I probably, in the scheme of things, over the whole series, I only did 3, of which 2 were with Colin Baker, and the last one with Sylvester McCoy. But so that's probably why, because I think there were many designers who did quite a few more over the whole scheme of the years that it went on.
Those Colin Baker stories were his last 2, so were you aware of Doctor Who before working on it?
Oh yes, I mean Doctor Who was big because, well, it's always been big really, and it was obviously one of those iconic things that when you worked in the studio part of it, because it was done mainly a lot of studio and some on location, was the TARDIS. So I remember watching, believe it or not, the very first series in black and white of Doctor Who when they were when the TARDIS was first introduced. So it is an iconic thing to go and look at the police box, telephone box that was up the TARDIS. So it was, yes, it was good fun, and it was one of those things that we all did some parts of over the time.
Your first encounter with the show was Terror of the Vervoids, which I think is actually one of my favourite Colin Baker stories. That had a fantastic cast of Honor Blackman, Michael Craig. Was that quite a nice one to do to start with?
Yes, it was actually. Interestingly enough, with they got very good people to come in and guest really in their shows, and I wasn't particularly aware. I have to be honest, I can't remember being particularly aware, as it was a long time ago, of them being Colin Baker's last two. But he was great fun to work with. The whole team were good. I'm not sure how many Bonnie Langford had done before then. I can't remember. But she was being introduced, I think, so that then she did the series, I think, with Sylvester McCoy. But yes, Honor Blackman was interesting because I was able to contact her with a slight inside knowledge because she happened to be, I'm half Canadian, and the Canadian side of the family knew her, and she was godmother to my cousin. So when you're dealing with somebody, when you've got a big name, shall we say, and you can link up or introduce yourself on a much easier basis, it makes life easier. So you break down barriers quite quickly that way. And Michael Jaston, I had worked with when I still was an assistant, when he was in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. And that was a long-running series of a John le Carré with Alec Guinness. So there were people you know, so it always makes it life easier. And it was a great cast, so it was good. Yeah.
That particular story, it was, you know, Doctor Who on a spaceship, but was it a little bit more straightforward in comparison to some of the latter ones you did?
You probably caught me a bit on memory there. The main thing about the Vervoid one was the actual plant aliens, shall we say, and the whole thing for us was that we had one that was supposed to be a mutant, and I had with me a chap called Simon Titherley, and he was quite keen on prosthetics, so I got him as my main assistant. And I remember we worked on the plan of what we would do to the girl who was going to play the part, and I was quite keen to sort of make it look as though the plant was still under her skin. So there were parts, hopefully, I'm not sure how much it showed, but basically he sculpted as though they were still under the skin and then erupting out. I think the hierarchy, because of wanting certain things recognised, they didn't want it to cover her whole face. So hence why it was mainly, I think, one side, if I recollect. But that was quite a good thing to have to try and do. And we then had to link with the special effects department, because at the BBC, there wasn't really, outside now, you have a sort of the special effects department or lead special effects, but equally you get prosthetic special effects. So they're more people who deal with, they may deal with all the explosions on, but they mainly make things to actually go on people. Whereas at the BBC, because it was a smaller entity, you had the makeup department and you had the special effects department. So they handled all. So they were definitely going to be making a lot to do with the Vervoids, although I think there it was a real link between the costume department and the special effects with the costume. But we had to go with what they had done and created before we could really decide what to do on her face and go along with the design and then adapt it accordingly.
Because I always think that prosthetic is quite grotesque. So would that have been very early days of prosthetics in the BBC?
Yes, it was really, probably. I think the other thing was that it was, but budget-wise, there were some budgets, some programmes at the BBC around even before then, because when I first joined in the 70s, it was the time of I, Claudius, and that was one of the breakthrough ones with prosthetics and ageing with foam latex and things like that, which was the only material around then. So with this one, the budget was much, much more restrictive. So to go outside and have something made would have been problematic. Equally, I, like Simon, were really interested in prosthetics, so I was quite up for the challenge of doing it ourselves. But I was lucky to have him, that he was able to also make, because I basically was a designer, so you still have links with doing wigs and other things that may be needed. So I could leave him in the workshop to try and sculpt it. But we were happy to take that work on, which was great, which he then furthered and did more for me when we did, I think it was the next one, where it was Michael Jaston with Geoffrey Hughes. I can't remember the title of that one, unfortunately. You'd have to refresh my memory. But on that, the challenge was that Michael Jaston was the bad person, and he encompassed Geoffrey Hughes. So there was an area where he was going to have to pull off his face mask, as it were, because one assumes it's Geoffrey Hughes and it's not. I think the character was, I did look this up, and I think it was Popperwick that Geoffrey Hughes played, and we made him deliberately, as the sort of name encompasses, very Dickensian. So he had quite large sideburns. So there was quite a good area for disguising edges and different things on the face. But Simon basically sculpted, had a lot of pictures of Geoffrey Hughes, and re-sculpted the face so that a mask could be made to put on Michael Jaston, and then reveal the face underneath as the evil one. On that one. So that was very challenging, because not many people had done that within the BBC at that point.
So for what was essentially, you know, a family kids show, you were actually exploring a lot of new techniques and methods then.
Yes, I suppose it was exploring in the sense of we were undertaking it ourselves rather than trying to outsource it. We didn't want the special effects department to do it, because there's a slight difference when you have things that are made by a special effects department who are really geared to explosions and making mechanical things that work. When you actually have prosthetic pieces that have to go on an artist, that artist has to really feel they can move around in them, and it's attached to their face. And there's a different skill in disguising edges and making it work and sculpting it for them. And it's much nicer. If I was working in the same capacity and I was employing somebody else, I would go to a prosthetic makeup person rather than a special effects person, because you know they can adapt to the face or the body more easily, and they understand the problems that we encompass. So that was quite good. We were doing that, but we enjoyed doing it. It was taking on learning. But the only material available to them then was the foam latex, which of course nowadays, I mean, with Neil Gorton and the Doctor Who now, it's all silicone. It's amazing. It's a completely different ball game, and there's a big budget thrown at it. Whereas in the BBC days, in the 1980s, the budgets were small. So it had to be, you know, sort of worked out carefully, really, what we did. But it was quite challenging. It was, but it was partly because we were both interested in that area.
For both of those Colin Baker stories, they were directed by Chris Clough. Had you worked with him before? How was he to work with on this?
No, I hadn't. No, I hadn't worked with him before. I mean, I think the BBC, basically, the BBC did operate, it obviously no longer exists in the same capacity, but when we actually had departments which you collaborated them with very much, and we were linked obviously to costume in a big way, and the effects and design, but you were in charge of your own department. So we would run things past directors. There would be production meetings, we'd run things past the director and so on, and you'd link with costume, but we basically came up with our own ideas. I think the thing now is that there are a lot more people out there, that there are art directors. So there's a lot more people who have to approve what we chose to do. So on Doctor Who, a lot of the directors were very happy to take our advice, really. And you ran it past, but a lot was approved and liked. We used to run things past John Nathan Turner, who would often just leave you to it, or he would have a definite idea that he wanted the Doctor Who, that particular program, to follow a certain route. For instance, if we just moved quickly to the Sylvester McCoy one, there were the characters, they called the Kangs, I think, weren't they? Something like that. There were girls, basically, and there were 3 gangs. There was a yellow, a red. There was only one yellow, I think, is spy, but there was a yellow, red, and blue. And my assistant and I just happened to be out. We were just trying to think of something. To be fair, on that one, there wasn't that involvement with prosthetics or anything like that. So we were trying to be a bit more creative. And I don't quite remember how we managed to get sort of almost a Hitler type moustache from Richard Bryce, but it worked really well, and he was very for it. But with these Kangs, I can remember we were out shopping and we spotted a shop that sold these acrylic wigs, really, that were black, but had red in them, blue and yellow. And we suddenly came up with the idea, wouldn't it be great if they all had this and this was their mark? But we had to be very careful because we thought it was a great idea because of these colours being in these wigs, but they were all black and they were all identical in style. I think it was mainly just a fringe with a sort of a bob, but they looked really good. So we bought a few, took them back, and we had to convince Jonathan Nathan it was a really good idea to have these gangs like this. But he wanted us to make the hair different in the sense of more natural. So we had to then, we did buy them, but we then styled some of them in different ways, which was harder than it was because they're acrylic, which not boring or anything, but don't necessarily take curl and things like that. So it was a challenge, but he did agree. So that's how they ended up being sort of red, blue, and I think there was a yellow at the beginning or something, who died, but on those lines. So that was good. So there was a lot of times we basically did our own thing, but you just had to make sure it was okay. But they were very good fun. That particularly was very good fun just to watch when you're on the lines and just watching them in rehearsals, because there were 3 ladies in that who were supposed to be cannibalistic old ladies, and they sent the whole thing up a little bit, so they had to pull back on their performance, I think they were told to. But it was very funny watching them all, and Richard Briers on the set. It was very enjoyable, that one, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's certainly a story that everyone's sort of sending it up to some extent. And as I say, particularly Richard Briers with the little moustache, and then he painted him silver for the last part as well.
Oh, I don't remember that. Was it? I'd have to rewatch that. No, I didn't remember that. Oh, right, okay. But he was lovely. He's such a, I mean, everybody on these, I think, just embraced the whole thing of being involved in that sort of iconic series of Doctor Who, and enjoyed doing it, really.
And on that one, which is Paradise Towers, the costume designer was a lady called Janet Tharby. So with the wigs, did you then have to convince her about this colour scheme idea, or was it already a collaborative?
No, I mean, I think, had I worked with Janet before, we did work together a few times, but I think I think you just know what they're going to do, and we just said, this is what we think we'll probably do. It's easy. It was easier to, at the BBC, because they had the separate departments, it was easier to sort of almost take charge of your own compartment, as it were. So it would be a case of, we think we're going to be doing this. The time where things really you linked with costume more was probably on period things as well, where hair shapes mattered if there were hats and the costumes, and you would link definitely there. But on the whole, we were in charge, which outside, sometimes there are more mingling of different things, especially obviously in theatre. There are art directors who dictate what set, what costume, and then how the people should look a little bit more. But we had quite a lot of freedom to do what we wanted, really. Because in fact, the first time when I actually left the BBC in 1990 and I freelanced, one of the first things I did was for a director I'd worked for at the BBC, and we were doing a thing called Suddenly Last Summer with Maggie Smith and Natasha Richardson. And it was small, but they had got an art director, and he wanted, I found, because he'd come from the outs, he was mainly theatre as well as opera, and so he wanted me to go through him before I spoke to a lot of the artists, and I wasn't used to that, because I was used to really working with Richard Eyre and just saying, well, you know, and being in charge of my department. So it was an interesting learning curve. I mean, I did it and so on, but it was interesting that there was a different route sometimes on the outside. Not much, but there can be.
Because, of course, more recently, you've been involved with the RSC sort of live broadcasts.
Yes.
How is that being involved, sort of television and theatre, that sort of odd mix?
Well, it's a wonderful job for me, because I'm not fully, I go in as the sort of advisor when they go live for the live in the cinema. So suddenly What we look for, it's a theatrical adaptation. Obviously, it is Shakespeare, and they're aware now of a lot of the things where people going closer. So wig lace and beard lace and things like that aren't ideal. So Sandra Smith, who's in charge, they talk a lot and they try and use a lot more of own hair. But it's mainly that sort of thing we look for, and it's just really as an advisor, or we change certain things for the 2 days, or certainly for the actual evening of the live, to adapt it for the big screen. So things like when they do blood or dirt, they just sort of can get away with not exactly splashing on, because they know where to put it, but a lot of the time as humans we tend to be very systematic and make patterns. So and sometimes in the speed of things, because it's live and it's fast, the actors have to do themselves, and they tend to do very even marks. So dirt might go there, it might go there, and they look identical. So when suddenly they're in a big screen, it just doesn't look right. So I point things out, and we get to see it live. We do a rehearsal where it's recorded. We then go into a local cinema and we are shown what it should possibly go towards looking like, so we can see what jars. I mean, blood that is sometimes put on the stage, it might be that the camera isn't really focusing on the person who's doing it, so suddenly this blood appears and it doesn't make complete sense. So there's we jiggle things around, and then a lot of it they do have sometimes they have a little bit of the prosthetics in there of false noses, scars, wounds, and I adapt them for the big screen, so that they hopefully look a little bit more realistic. But it all has to be done in the space of a live performance. So the first one I remember encountering was they were doing Richard II, I think, and we had a character who played 2 parts, because it's like a troupe, so they often play different parts. And he had a false nose with warts and things like that, character Bardolph. And he had, I think, an extension to his own moustache, but he also played a King of Wales. So when we went back after the sort of interval, he was the King of Wales, where I think he had a beard. I'm not quite sure, but the ins and outs were he had a wig and he had a beard, but he had a quick change of something like 3 minutes to get out of a costume, out of the wig, out of the beard, and go back in to Bardolph with the false nose and everything. So they're literally, and another costume change. So the timing was massive. And it was my first learning curve of really making this nose look far more realistic, but in the realms of that it would have to go on in split seconds, really. So I think our job, what I think is so great about it, is that we're always learning and adapting. So going back to 1980s, when it was really foam latex, it was that's why people tried to get things that were much more realistic. And the next component that came in was really what we call prosthetic gelatin, which looked more realistic, was better. So in the things like where you get the casualties and the Holby cities, that's when gelatin was used. And then obviously they discovered silicone, and then silicone is completely taken over because it's not affected by heat or cold or anything. It's amazing material, but it's expensive. So there's in all the areas that we deal with, going back to Doctor Who, where the budgets were low-ish, they weren't horrendous, but you had to think carefully how many assistants you had, how many people you had doing what, and what you were going to spend money on. And it comes down to really what the materials available, our expertise and budgets a lot of the time. And also with the actors, whether they're prepared to wear things or not, and time, because if there's not the time, then you can't do it. Because in fact, going back to the RSC, the last biggest challenge I had was recently, and the play, I've forgotten the name of the which one it was, but there was a small child. Actually, it might have been, it wasn't Richard III, King John, it might have been King John. Basically, there was a small child who gets killed, and they wanted it, in the play, the director wanted him to look as though he'd fallen off a cliff, so that his face was sort of bashed in a bit. And they, being a child, there was also a very quick change. So they didn't want anything to stick on him, just to be stuck. They couldn't afford to get anything in his eyes. and it all had to be taken off with literally, I think it was a couple of minutes. It was very, very quick. So they had used a piece of lace, I think, and just put some blood on it. So you can imagine for a big screen, and somebody goes, that's not ideal. So I came up with an idea using the lace, but incorporating silicone onto it. So it looked a bit more as though his face had been gouged out. But it all had to stay there in place, really, by blood, sticky blood. It was quite a challenge. It was, I mean, it wasn't ideal, but it was very interesting to have to take that on, and that's recently. So I think you never stop learning in this job. There's always little things that crop up with challenges to make you rethink how you do things.
Well, on that note of always still learning and adapting, I'd just like to say thank you very much for your time, Shauna. It's been a delight.
You're welcome.
You can tweet along and join in the conversation using our hashtag #Who'sUnsungHeroes. Don't forget to click like and subscribe so you can receive notification of future episodes.
I'm joined now by someone who worked on arguably the most interesting time of Doctor Who, which was the Christopher Eccleston reboot of the show. I'd like to introduce stunt coordinator Lee Sheward. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Comfortably at home in lockdown.
Making the most of it then.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep busy. The wife's got a list of jobs for me to do.
So this is an excuse not to do them for a little bit longer then.
Oh, this is a great excuse. Time speaking to you, coffee, and sit down for 5 minutes.
Good. So I wanted to take you back to 2004. Doctor Who had been off air for quite a while, and you're involved in the reboot of it. Was there an expectation that everything had to be big and impressive, or was it just, we just want this, or a fall or a stunt or whatever?
Remembering back, and it is a few years ago now, but with fondness, it was going to be a big reboot. The show had been off the air for a number of years, 6 or 7 if I remember rightly, maybe longer. And the rumour mill had been in the press and the PR and the media had been running it was coming back. So there was a big hype about it. To start off with, I wasn't employed on the show in prep or any of recce's or rehearsals. I was brought in later. There was issues on the show with it starting with what they were trying to do. So I wasn't the first coordinator on the starting ep. So I was brought in a few days later. They had already completed some shooting, but the first thing I had to do when I walked in was a huge explosion and blowing out windows and things. So it was quite a walk in and trial by fire, but it was all good fun. Nothing we hadn't done before. And I was also brought in because I'd done a cross section of work. In my career, I've worked on some very large films and also a cross section of TV. So I tried to bring big film experience to smaller shows, but likewise smaller show speed and accessibility into big feature films. So we came on with a bang.
And coming into it under sort of something of a cloud, there've been problems. Was it quite difficult to get people talking again, or was it very much like, this is what we're going to do, get on with it?
It had to be. The show must carry on. So no, it just had to happen, and it had to happen quickly. So there's no talking about it. It was just literally, right, this is what's going to be done. Bang, 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 sort it out, and off we were going. And then I carried on with the next, I think, 10 or 12 episodes. The issues they'd had with the previous director and the stunt coordinator hadn't really gelled with the rest of the crew. So they were working off at a tangent of what the producers and the actors and the rest of the crew were expecting. There had been a couple of near accidents. People weren't injured, but there had been a few incidents where things had gone wrong or weren't planned properly. And the result wasn't, again, what the producers were wanting. So the director left and the stunt coordinator was dropped. Eros Lem was brought in, and myself, and we went from there.
So the first story you would have worked on would have been End of the World, which was Doctor Who's sort of first foray into sci-fi, aliens, proper, something like that. When you're dealing with lots of people in prosthetics, lots of CG, does that make your job more complicated rather than if you've got a house and it has to blow up?
The blowing up bit's effects. So we work quite closely with the special effects supervisors on various shows, working from experience, what can be done, what can't be done. With regards to prosthetics and costumes and makeup, it does. I mean, obviously, it's much easier to be in contemporary clothing and running shoes and stuff than it is to be dressed up as a Cyberman or something. And also, you've got the makeup issues bring in that it's quite restrictive, it's quite claustrophobic, you're limited vision. But I mean, again, as I've mentioned before, my career has run through many feature films and many other shows, so it's nothing we haven't dealt with before. And over the years, from The Fifth Element, when we were all Menglors, when you were in these great big chuggle-headed things and you couldn't see, or there's so many jobs we've done over the years as zombies with limited vision, or but the one thing with this that was really encouraging was I used to watch the show when I was a kid. So the one thing I did do was make sure that all the stuntmen that were coming on as best as possible were all middle-aged men that remembered the same thing. So they're all reliving their youth. And a few of them were like so excited. They'd all done huge films, Titanic and Bond and Bourne films and all the action films of the 80s and 90s. But then suddenly I'm calling them up to come and get shot by a Dalek. And you've never heard so many excited 45-year-old men in your life.
Because of course that first series, you had the TARDIS, Daleks, and then you also went on to have the Cybermen in the second year. So as someone that had enjoyed it, are you sort of slightly tainted when you're approaching how to do a stunt, or is it just like this is a prop now you've got to deal with? No,
I mean, with respect to the show, it was just boys having a lot of fun. I mean, how could you not, as a middle-aged stuntman, say, I want to get shot by a Dalek? I mean, it was like the best thing in the world. I mean, even to this day, 15, 16 years later, the stunt guys I had on the show with me are still going, can I do another Dalek death over there? Because it wasn't hammy, but they were all excited to get involved with it.
So as a coordinator, you are devising and developing the stunts. Did you ever find yourself actually on camera doing any of it?
No, not on that show. I have in the past, many times. Obviously, prior, I was a stunt before I was a stunt coordinator and now director. I was actually a stunt man for many years and did it all the gigs myself. So everything I asked anyone to do or have done since, I've done myself. But no, on the show, on the Eccleston series, no, I didn't get involved in front of camera. I don't think I did. I did subsequently later, I did a couple of the Christmas specials and a bit of Torchwood. And I think I got short-handed once or twice and had to quickly run in and do something. I think I did a thing chasing Bernard Cribbins, bless him. And he wasn't the quickest runner at his age, but and thank God he's still with us. But yeah, no, subsequently I did, but no, not on the Eccleston series.
And you mentioned, you had experience with Eccleston and then 2 specials with Tennant. How had the series changed and evolved by the time you came back to it?
It had. I mean, it had evolved in as much as it was a super success. I mean, after Chris's few episodes aired, straight away, I can't remember what the ratings numbers were, but it was massive. It was everywhere. And it does have a global following. I mean, currently I spend a lot of time in California. And even out there, people are going, oh, they see on your resume, what they call it a resume, CV, that you've worked on Doctor Who. And they think it's amazing because it's like Star Trek. It's got such a cult following. Well, it was aired before Star Trek. It's got such a cult following that once you've done something like that, you are part of an elite club, really. And looking at the stuntmen that have worked on the show over the years, going back to Terry Walsh and Stuart Fell and Steve Emerson, and I'm sure there's other people as well that you're going to interview. They're a great bunch, the ones that are left alive, bless them, I still try and keep in touch with. So you are part of an elite club. So it's been a ride.
And I think in terms of Doctor Who, one of the most sort of striking sequences was the Planet of the Dead with Michelle Ryan and a lot of wire work as she's stealing from the museum. When you've got something like that, where it's got to feature the actor, what sort of balance do you have between stunt double and the actress? How does that work?
Now, that's a very good one to choose from, because I was laughing to myself when we first came up with the concept of that, and we recce'd the location in central Cardiff, which I think is a government building. When we went in there and the director said what he wanted, straight away, I brought in big film experience that we've had from before into the show. I brought in the same rigging crew, Bob Schofield, the wire supervisor, and his son Max, with me. And we got Michelle to do 99% of it herself. So we did have a stunt double for her, Kim McGarity, who'd also worked for me on the show doubling Billy Piper. We put a wire rig in, but Bob and I had done the first Mission Impossible with Tom Cruise. And Bob had rigged and installed, and I tested to death the wire rig where Tom Cruise comes in through the air conditioning duct, inverts, he's lowered upside down through the set to a keyboard, lays out flat, typing, and then drops, and the whole floor business. And we built all that and put it all in, and I tested it. Well, the gag that we were doing with Michelle was nigh on based on that sequence. So it was Bob and I doing it again. So it's like a little bit like deja vu. And Michelle was well up for everything we could throw at her. She really wanted to be part of the action heroine role. I think she went on to, or she had played the Bionic Woman as well in Canada. So she was all up for the physicality of the role involved. So it was good fun. And again, Kim did some of it, but 90% of it was Michelle.
And with any stunt, do you start with the script or what the actor does or doesn't want to do? Where does it begin, that process?
The process does begin with the script. The writers write the sequences. We don't have carte blanche to change things because obviously there's too many involvements. But when we're talking about it or when we go on recce's, we can adapt and evolve things or come up with ideas. I'll always throw ideas at the director about what can be done instead of, because I find that a lot of the writers, and not just on Doctor Who, but across the industry, the writers, unless they're really, really into a certain subject matter, don't really have a lot of physical idea of what can be done. That's my job. So we can go in and change things if they need to. So if we see something and think, well, this could work better, or we can adapt it to do this, we can throw that in. Sometimes it's put back because the director doesn't want that, which is fine. Or the producers can't afford it because it's too expensive, which is fine. But no, we can put as much effort and input into changing or improving on the sequences as we can.
Because again, with David Tennant, you had a lot of scenes in The End of Time, which was Bernard Cribbins or John Sim or David Tennant running around the docks, or all sorts of things. So at what point do you get in a double? Or, because as you say, Bernard perhaps isn't the fastest runner. Often, I suppose, is it get them on screen as much as possible and then work out a double?
Yeah, I mean, with all of them, they all need looking after. So our first thing is paramount, how to make this look after them. Now, it might be a matter that we have to just clear a path so they can run themselves. And before they do their run, make sure they've limbered and warmed up, they don't pull a muscle. I mean, you can imagine the scheduling of these shows is quite tight. It's a busy thing to run. It's 5 or 6 days a week. It's 12 hours a day, at least. And if you're playing the Doctor, it's your show. You're in it a lot. So if David had twisted an ankle or stubbed a toe and had to have a couple of days off, it cost a lot of money to reschedule, across the whole program. So if I think that there's a chance of them being injured, then we will always use a double. The 3 people you just mentioned all had doubles. But if it's something as simple as running or just climbing over a fence, we'll make sure the fence is safe. We'll have a rehearsal, showing them where to put their feet. There's a number of things we can do just to look after them, making sure that they are seen on screen. doing what, doing the gag to make sure that they're seen doing it. And a lot of them do want to be part of it. It's their character. So the doubles were used, but we try and base it around what the actors are capable of doing.
And that particular story was obviously David Tennant's last one. Was there a sort of a sense in the atmosphere that it was something special, or it was quite a sad moment? Or what was it like going back for that one?
I hadn't done any of the series with him. Funny enough, I did the transformation with Chris to him that day. And then I did his transformation from him to Matt Smith. So I was there sort of top and tail, but I hadn't done the bit in the middle. One, I was off on other shows working, and they got some other guys, other stunt coordinators in to do the series those years. But I got brought back for the bigger Christmas specials. I could feel on the set that he was a well-liked character, the actor, I mean, and he'd had a lot of fun with it. And it had been, again, very, very successful. So there was a moment where you could feel it. I also wasn't, they don't shoot these things in sequence. It's not like first day shot. I don't remember in the schedule where it is, but I was going to say death scene, but the transformation scene where they change character might have been 6 weeks in the middle. You might still have another 6 weeks of filming. It's not like his transformation that's it, he's out of costume and never does it again. He might have done that and still had another 3 weeks of filming to do. But I know it was a big turning point that he was leaving. People knew he was leaving. He muted out of the character, and that was it. But I wasn't actually there the last day of set. His last day on set, I imagine, was a bit of a tearjerker for everyone involved. He's just a very sweet man as well.
And of course, within the sort of Doctor Who universe, you worked on the first episode of Torchwood and Miracle Day as well. So you sort of bookended the series. Again, I imagine you sort of, you start with the script, but was that, as a more adult audience, were you able to push things a little bit more?
With Torchwood, they definitely wanted to push it more. And as you just mentioned, to an adult audience, it was more violent. They wanted, clearly having conversations, they wanted the action more heavier, more grotesque, if you want. So the car chases and the motorbike stuff we did had to be, of a bigger nature. We did a car chase with a Land Rover Defender being chased by a helicopter down a beach. And Jamie Edgell, the driver of the car, at one point was doing 70 miles an hour along that beach in Wales, with two people hanging out the back firing guns being chased by a helicopter. And Doctor Who had never done anything like this. I mean, we'd done a few minis type, we did a mini wheel spinning tied to a chain, so the TARDIS and things like that, but we'd never done, this was proper car chases now. And we did have the aerial company flying Castle Air with the helicopter broadsiding, and that helicopter was 5 feet from the ground going sideways down a beach at 70 miles an hour. It was, the CGE helicopter crash was fake, but the rest of it is all real. And standing on that hillside watching it, that's proper stunt work. That's a proper car chase, which Doctor Who had never done. So yeah, they ramped it up for that. I don't think the audience, it didn't bite for too long. It was a short-lived show, but they definitely picked it up.
So at
it was angrily shot as well. Half of it was shot in California and half of it was shot in Wales. So I was going to do both, but in the end they split crews.
Because how different is it working in the UK as opposed to the US? Obviously, you're still aiming towards the same product, but is there different methods and approaches to it all?
No, it's a global industry. The method is in my book, it's exactly the same. It's I'm getting too old to change my tricks now. The way we do things is the way we do things. The terminology is slightly different, but other than that, it's really the same the world over.
As we touched upon earlier, when you started out as a stuntman, you were working on things like Indiana Jones, Willow, Bond. Was that sort of the ideal time to get into stunts? Because that seems to have been sort of the golden age of practical stunts. Every
group of stuntmen that I've ever worked with, when I started, I was 18, and some of the guys on the set were in their 60s, late 60s. Actually, on one of the first jobs I ever worked on, there was two senior stunt coordinators well into their late 60s, maybe early 70s, that were doing the same job as me in costume working. And I was 18, and they announced to everyone in the room they'd retire. They went, boys, we're retiring. That's us out. We've had enough. Thank you very much. Everyone clapped. They walked out the door, and they were never seen again on a set. And that was a stunt coordinator called George Leach and another one called Jack Cooper. Now, both those guys sadly are no longer with us, but their careers have gone back to the 40s and 50s and Bond of the 60s. I mean, George was the stunt coordinator on Her Majesty's Secret Service. Jack was a legend. He'd done all sorts of things, right back to the long ships in the Vikings with Kirk Douglas and Tony Curtis. So these were very experienced people. And talking to them, their period, they saw that the industry was a mess and a dead, and it wasn't working, and they'd had the best years out of it. Subsequently, in the middle of my career in the 90s and 2000s, other stunt coordinators have subsequently retired, and they said to me at that point, we've had the best years out of it. I'm coming into the middle of the back end of my career, if you like, as a stuntman after 30 years, and I've had a lot of fun and good times. Whether it was the best times, who knows? I mean, I love the history of what I do. So I think, honestly, if I'd have been born in the 50s and 60s, those sort of films were more entailed to what I would have loved to have been part of. But I think you're always romancing the story. It all sounds great and wonderful, but maybe it wasn't as they look at it years later through rose-tinted glasses.
And looking at your incredible body of work, there's Bonds, there's Indiana Jones, but it did make me smile that amongst it is Some Others Do Have Them, The Job Lot, and Birds of a Feather.
Well, yes. Part of that is the fact that stuntmen and extras on the whole, and extras in a nicer sort of way, the Ricky Gervais show sort of touched upon this, but extras and stuntmen are the only two bodies really that work in all media, because we're smallish bodies of people. So you get camera people that will do TV, camera people that do commercials, camera people that do feature films. There's very few that dip and dabble in all three. Where stuntmen are a limited market. There's only a few of us really. So we're needed in everything. I left many years ago. It was next year, I think it was 25 years this year, 26, coming up 26. 26 years ago, we worked on Titanic in Mexico, and I finished that job at Christmas. And my first job back in January that year, all those years ago, was the bill. So I went from the biggest feature film in the world, shooting in Mexico with hundreds of people on this massive ship, to doing like a muggers scene, doing a handbag snatch in Merton on the bill. So it really does change everything. And a couple of years ago, I was working in Madrid, and I was directing that particular show. It was a feature film with Bruce Willis, and we were doing a big car chase. We had 100 cars. We shut down the central part of Madrid. We had a specialised camera crane called a Russian arm flying up and down. We had 50 stuntmen, 50 extras, all these roads. It was a massive number. Set this road up and did it. And the producers were standing there, and it all worked and it looked fantastic. And they turned to me and said, "How did you learn how to do this?" I went, "EastEnders." Because for that sequence, we had a couple of weeks of prep. And if you do something like EastEnders, you walk in and have to shoot the scene in an hour. So there's no prep time. You have to use your experience and flying by the seat of your pants. So we do everything, and I'm very proud of having done everything. And I don't belittle the feature films when they look down on TV. And I also tell the TV people, don't look at feature films and think this is the best thing in the world, because they're not. Some of the feature films that I've worked on have been terribly badly organised, and TV hasn't got that money to play with. It has to be very, very well organised. Last year I heard that the Bond film employed 50 plus stuntmen and used 4, which makes no sense at all. Where a TV company can't afford to do that. Whatever they're going to use, they use everything and use it to the best of their abilities. So over the years we have worked on some funny ones.
Yeah, and I imagine a sort of short but sweet job was the comic relief some others do have them with Michael Caulfield. And famously, he does a lot of his own stunts, doesn't he?
More than famously, infamously, on pain of death, did you ever even dream of offering a stunt double? I mean, again, the same gentleman that was driving the car for the Doctor was also Michael's double, Jamie Edgell. Jamie had used to be in a Starlight Express, a roller skating show in the West End of London. So he's very experienced on roller skates. So I brought him in to help me, not double Michael, but to re-coach Michael to do every single thing himself. So that reboot, and also in my negotiations with the producers for the Beeb, when we made that, they were trying to get me to tell him he had to be doubled because he's now in his 70s. I mean, I love the original show, and I've got a box set that Michael signed for me as well, and a picture, bless. But he did every single thing himself. The roller skating, we had him at the Velodrome in London, towed behind a motorbike, and also Bradley Wiggins pedalling at 40 miles an hour with Michael hanging on the back of the bike. That's all real, and it is Michael. So he absolutely staunchly, if it wasn't him, he wasn't doing it, and he would have walked off the show and shut the whole thing down. So everything's him, even to the point of an insert shot of a leg, and a bicycle has to hit a leg. That leg is Michael's. He wouldn't even let me put the trousers on just for an insert shot of a leg. Every single thing had to be him, which is incredible. So, no, that was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun, that job.
I'm aware I don't want to take up too much of your time, but were you working on anything before this started? Is there anything we can look forward to of your work?
Currently, we're in lockdown. I'm not sure when people are watching this and when it's airing, but it's mid-May 2020. The garden's looking lovely. The sun is out shining, and we're all sitting at home. But I've just wrapped up for Netflix, The Crown, about the English royal family. I can't give too much away because, again, I don't know when this is airing, but there's 2 sequences in that in season 4 that I've been working on that'll make the cut and is all part of it to vamp it up a bit. I mean, that particular show isn't action orientated at all, so for them it's all a new thing. But we spent before lockdown, we spent a few weeks working on stuff for them. So we're working on The Crown for Netflix. And after this, hopefully, I've got a thing for Apple TV with a big chase through London for a show for them, if it happens. This year's a funny year for everybody. So I'm just hoping everyone's keeping safe and well and sitting at home.
Well, on a load of things to look forward to, I'd just like to say thank you very much for your time, Lee. It's been absolutely fascinating.
You're very welcome. And keep watching. I look forward to the next series when it airs.
Don't forget you can catch up on any of our live streams and interview programmes via our YouTube channel, including Murder in the Afternoon, an investigation into Agatha Christie's most finest television adaptations, featuring stars from ITV's Poirot and BBC's Miss Marple series. The Unsung Heroes of Doctor Who will return after this short break. Anyone with a love of the theatre will be aware of the Ghost Train.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Yes.
Definitely. Yes, I knew the play.
It's terribly famous. No, not at all.
I saw the film originally.
I've seen a few amateur versions done.
On research, I was quite surprised I'd never heard of it.
I researched it on Wikipedia.
It was so famous.
I studied at a drama school.
And I'll tell you truthfully, I haven't read the play.
I shall deal with her later.
I know, I'm so sorry.
It's interesting to note that the author of The Ghost Train is Arnold Ridley, who everyone knows for playing Godfrey in Dad's Army.
I'm Nicholas Ridley, and I'm Arnold Ridley's only son.
It's amazing, isn't it?
And there was that little old man in Dad's Army.
That's what people perhaps don't realise about actors, that you have other strings to your bow.
I used to sit at the BBC Acton Hilton with his daddy, John Le Mesurier, John Laurie, and all the boys from that.
It goes back a long, long, long way.
He wrote it in just under 3 weeks, and he wrote it in an upper room above the shop by candlelight.
Of course, it was written 80 years ago, and it's quite a testament to his ability as a writer that it's still going strong today.
Ghost Train itself was translated into 17 languages. There have been 3 films of it so far. It was a sort of mixed blessings, as all early success can be, in that he felt that a lot of his later plays were actually better plays, but they never really achieved any of the success that the Ghost Train did.
The Phantom Films version of the Ghost Train was recorded in December of 2009. It was a very hot and sweaty day in the studio.
Well, interestingly, it's called the Oxygen Rooms, and there was no oxygen. It was just carbon dioxide and sweat.
It was very intimate. We got to know each other very well very quickly.
And it was great fun.
Very confined, but good fun, yeah.
It's amazing to have a piece of my work in French's Theatre Bookshop.
Samuel French has been very supportive of the whole project, and we're here today at their theatre bookshop near Warren Street in London to launch the audiobook.
At drama school, when you need to get a play, French's is the place to go.
Yes, you have a French's stamp put on your wrist the moment you decide that you're going to act.
So I know my father would have been just delighted that you made this audio book. He would want me to wish you all sorts of luck with it. I'm sure it'll be a great success. Thanks very much. So it's been great to actually meet the cast and hear about how it was done, and I'm sure it's going to be a great success, and really looking forward to listening to it myself.
We have a brilliant cast for the Ghost Train. Most recognisably, I think, will be Katie Manning, Jo Grant in Doctor Who from the 70s, playing Miss Bourne in the only way that she possibly could.
Do you know that in spite of all these terrible happenings, I'm beginning to feel quite happy.
Well, they obviously, in a few minutes that they had to cast somebody, said, who can we get that's really old and who does drunk well?
We have Ian Fairbairn as the station master.
It never starts from churro, it never ends into some bland. If it be a natural thing, where do it come from? Where do it go? And the character has quite a lot to do in the first act. He disappears altogether in the middle and comes back blaming everybody for being nasty to him and making him involved in it all.
And we have a variety of actors, some of whom I know through various other projects that we've done together.
My name's Minna Pang and I play Elise Winthrop. I'm travelling with my husband, Richard Winthrop, and we've been married a few years and perhaps hitting a bit of a rocky patch.
Did you suggest a separation, or did I?
I did, but...
Very well then.
And I'm Michael Lindsay and I played Richard Winthrop. We were both in a temper.
I beg your pardon, but I never lose my temper.
Yeah, my name is Sean Connolly and I'm playing John Sterling.
I'm a doctor, ladies and gentlemen. Where is this poor chap? Let me see him.
My very good friend Ian Brooker, who's in the cast, he couldn't make it today, so I'm representing the villainy in the piece.
That's enough of this.
Don't touch me! Go away!
Damn it all! Easy, Price. Leave her to me.
Lots of subterfuge going on.
My name is Laura James and I played Peggy Murdoch, who is the newlywed.
My name is Luke Harrison and I played Charles Murdoch in the Ghost Train.
Bless my soul, this is my wedding night, isn't it?
Yes.
We don't want to hang about here long. They'll wonder what has happened at the hotel if we don't turn up.
I hope they won't think that you funked it and changed your mind.
What a joke.
I have a line where I say, we better do something quick or these women will go mad. And we all collapsed at that one a few times. So there were a few jokes like that, yeah.
There's definitely a few lines where you have a little giggle in the modern kind of context of the word, but that just makes the whole experience more fun.
And it doesn't take itself too seriously anyway, even I think at the time it was writing, it's quite tongue-in-cheek, so yeah.
And I managed to poke my eye out with a pencil after she'd had her first few brandies and spent the whole of Christmas wearing a black eye patch with Diamantes on it. I will never forget the Ghost Train.
You can get your copy of Arnold Ridley's The Ghost Train either from French's Theatre Bookshop or from our website www.phantomfilms.co.uk.
But I'm in a devil of a mess.
We all are.
Haven't you tumbled to him yet? That's Detective Inspector Morrison of the Secret Service.
I say!
Well?
Like the ghost train that he spoke of.
I know what is going to happen, and it's going to happen soon. I can feel it.
Train comes a screaming and a tearing through the station.
Nonsense.
'Tis God's truth, I'm telling you, sir.
The second half of tonight's event features supporting artiste Philip Brown, who played the 7th Doctor in the 50th anniversary show The Day of the Doctor. But first, here is an interview with Gareth Milne, who played George Cranleigh in Black Orchid and stunt doubled for both Michael Cochrane and Peter Davison.
I'm joined now by a stunt coordinator who has worked on over 300 television and film productions. But in terms of Doctor Who, he's perhaps best remembered for his work on Black Orchid. So I would like to introduce stunt coordinator Gareth Milne. How are you?
Well, thank you very much. I'm really well, yeah.
And how are you finding these rather odd times?
It's just the same for me. I mean, I've now kind of retired from active service, and now I live, you know, quite quietly out in the rural wilds of Spain. And you know, most days are usually the same. I get up really early. I take the dogs for an hour's walk, and I get back. We make breakfast. I go to the supermarket, which we're allowed to do. But in Spain, the lockdown's been quite tough, and the Guardia Civil don't take prisoners. So we've been good residents and citizens. We've obeyed it to the letter, and but it didn't stop me getting it. I got the dreaded COVID-19. I got mild symptoms, but luckily I didn't have what it wanted, and it left me alone. It's strange to be dealing with a virus that seems to have an intelligence. It's quite weird being ill with it, but it was all better now.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear it. But I wanted to take you back to 1982 when you're working on Black Orchid, your first Doctor Who. Now, for that, you were not, I say, just in inverted commas, a stuntman, but you were actually a member of the cast. Was that common to be so involved in the show at the time?
Well, we used to call it, I mean, you know, a lot of my friends in the same generation of stunt people as me, you know, we used to call each other regularly, and I'd say, what are you doing this week? He said, oh, I'm Monster of the Month on Doctor Who. So, and what are you doing? So, well, funny enough, they just rung me and they want me to play one of those things that's, I don't know. He's the brain damaged son of somebody, and he's in an attic, and they want me to have a 2-hour makeup job. Oh, that doesn't sound very nice. No, but I'll do it anyway because I'm not doing anything else that week. And it was a gig, and the cast were were lovely. I remember the cast; they were cool, and they thought because you know it's not beyond the realms of what a stunt performer does is to take on a role where. But, you know, and sometimes with dialogue and sometimes with, you know, sort of interacting with other actors, because you know that a page and a half later you're going to die horribly and your body gets dumped off a bridge. So yes, I mean, it is part and parcel of a stuntman's job to be able to take on roles like that and to be able to, and this particular character in question ends up falling off the roof, or throwing himself off the roof at the end of the piece. So yeah, that's and it happens all the time. I mean, I used to, you know, I got wise to it after a while, because, you know, in certain scenes you'd be part of a gang that bursts through a door, then there'd be a gunfight, and then there'd be a huge dialogue sequence. So I'd be the first one in, I'd get shot, lie on the floor, and then be continuity for the next 2 days while everybody else had to stand there and while they shot this 4 pages of dialogue, and I'd be on the floor going, So yeah, it's it's a kind of it goes with the territory, yeah. And I love them. I absolutely love them. I've done loads of them, and they've been great fun. And you get to show your little bit of acting skill, whatever that is, very tiny bit of acting skill. But also it's the physicality. It always comes with the payoff of getting mutilated horribly, or beaten to a pulp, or run over, or, as I say, shot in the head. But yeah, no, I enjoyed it. And the cast realised, the actors realised that that's kind of what you're there for.
Because as Doctor Who goes, as you say, at the end of the story, you jump off the roof of the building, but you also jump through a burning door, which I suppose must be sort of fairly straightforward as a stuntman, but not really for Doctor Who.
Well, you had a very, very innovative special effects team. The BBC used to have its own in-house special effects department, and they were all great guys. They really were, and a lot of them are still around in the business now, all freelance and doing their own thing, but they set it up, and we'd always have a conflab before, and I was very much kind of part of their team and their they'd always ask me, what do you want this made of? How should we do this? What should we put? And basically we'll put it all camera side, and so that when you hit it, it's and so yeah, it's part of the design process. It's part of the effects process. And usually I'm always happy to go with what they recommend, because they're good lads and they know what they're doing.
And you mentioned earlier the prosthetic that you have for that story. How does that then influence the stunts that you do? Because I imagine the visibility was then limited to some extent.
Yeah, well, it does mean that you can only see out of one eye. I mean, that is a little bit limiting sometimes. But as long as it's your good eye, then it's not a problem. And you get used to compensate. I mean, I've worn costumes, and I've worn masks, and I've worn prosthetics, and I've worn helmets, and I've worn, much worse. But that one wasn't a particularly bad one. I could see out of half one eye, but the other eye was clear. Yeah, it did kind of wrong foot me a little bit when I fell off the roof, because I couldn't actually quite spot well enough when I went, and I kind of landed slightly on the edge of the boxes, and everybody thought I was dead. But it's just one of those it's just one of those moments that you put down to experience. I think any stuntman that's ever been or ever will be has had near misses and the occasional accident, which they will put down to experience. But I've been lucky, a full-on performing career of that amount of time. I've never really badly hurt myself or anyone else, and other people haven't been as lucky as me. So we do have a casualty list amongst the brethren. And we do our best to support as much as we can, but I don't like talking about accidents very much.
But before we started recording, you said you got on very well with the producer, John Nathan Turner.
Yes, bless him. Yeah, he was a nice guy.
And in terms of Doctor Who, you worked twice with Ron Jones, the director. How did you find him? Was he quite easy to work with?
Ron, total gentleman. Yeah, absolutely, completely kind of yes. What? Yes. Okay, fine. You like that? Okay, super. Okay, shoot it. He was totally sort of like, up for anything really. He just listened, and we worked things out, and we had a good relationship. I mean, things were kind of different then in the sort of like the early 80s than they are now. Directors were approachable. Directors did want to talk to you. Directors did want to input. Directors wanted to, they just, you know, these days it's a little bit different, but no, he was super.
So jumping ahead a little bit, it was no surprise then to be asked back to Doctor Who with Ron for Vengeance of Varos.
Yeah, that's something I can't remember too much about. You're going to have to jog me here, because I'm just thinking, Vengeance on Varos, what did I do? What did I come? You're going to tell me what I did, huh?
Colin pushes you and another stuntman into a pool of acid.
I
and then
remember.
you pull the other stuntman in.
I remember that. Yes, that was another collaboration with the BBC effects team. You know, I could just go. You know, I can't remember who the Viz effects. I think it might have been Dave Hazard or somebody like that. Havard. And I said, "What's in the tank, Dave?" He said, "Don't worry about it. It's fine." And you know, you just sort of like just took it. Just land flat. You know, just don't go in head first.
But something like that, I'm assuming that was just a couple of days rather than the whole episode.
I think it was an afternoon, actually, or something like that. That's the speed at which they used to in the days when you used to actually do the physical, you know, the actual live action in the studio within the confines of the concrete donut. You know, to be able to go to the BBC and work in those studios. Actually, I don't know what they do there now. Game shows, probably. I have no idea.
Yeah, it's changed quite a lot, I think, since the days of Who. But say between the two stories you mentioned, you doubled Peter Davison for two further stories. Firstly, with Pennant Roberts, in which you fall in over a rail into a water tank, which looked like quite a drop. Do you remember a great deal about that one?
No. Like we have to move on. No, that was kind of meat and drink. I used to do stuff like that on a daily basis for years. Pennant Roberts, I remember very fondly. Peter Davison, I remember very fondly. I went on to double him and also stunt coordinate the series he did later on, Campion. For the BBC, him and Dear Brian, and we had a good time on that too. Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea what Peter's doing now. Hopefully, he's retired.
Oh, he's still going, still working.
He's still going. He's still working. Bless him. Okay.
Yeah. And the final Who director you worked with was Graham Harper for Peter Davison's last story.
Oh,
a lot of people pick him out as a very special director because of his energy. Would you say similar?
Yeah, I worked for Graham several times after Who as well. Yeah, he was special. There was something about him, and I don't know now. You know, there's directors that you work for that kind of stick with you, you know, and sort of stay with you, and he stays with me a little bit. Graham, yeah.
So who would be some of the other directors that sort of really stood out for you outside of Doctor Who?
Oh, I worked with, what you mean, apart from Steven Spielberg and Stephen Frears and what's the other bloke? Yeah. I mean, they're hard-nosed. They're hard work, and they demand, and that's good. That's what their job is. But I remember I worked with Jonathan Glazer a couple of years ago, who was such an impressive bloke. And I worked with, and some of the older directors, you know, the Tristan de Vere Coles, and some of them that kind of, Michael Bryant's, and people that kind of went through the BBC system, but kind of just tended to sort of like disappear. But they were great guys, you know, no less talented and no less good a director, but they just seem to kind of go out of fashion, rather like me, you know. I mean, I think we all have to face it, that we're no longer, you know, we no longer sort of fit the modern requirements. But And I don't know whether it's got something to do with our attitude or just the fact that we're old. I've no idea, but it's a shame that that these people are. I mean, in America, it doesn't happen. You know, there are people directing into their 80s. But nowadays, it seems that if you're not in your 30s, have an absolutely super duper degree from somewhere, and then you're not going to get behind a camera.
Yes, no, very true. But in terms of film as well, because I mean, I could reel off a long list of iconic films. You not only worked on Bond, but also the Jason Bourne films. Now, both franchises are famed for, if you can do a stunt, you do it. How do the two compare?
Well, it's a different discipline. First of all, you're not making episodic drama or episodic television, which is all quite hard and fast. You're making something that you do have preparation time for, that you do have, which was when I first started doing big movies. I thought, wow, they're giving us a week to rehearse this. Wow, that's incredible. Thank you. Because they want to invest in, because it's a huge investment. They want to invest in getting it right first time. And at least, with episodic television, they could, haul you out, dust you down, change your costume, put your hat on straight, and then you can do it again, Film, a lot more preparation, a lot more really, really sort of like firm, hard schedule. And it moves at this pace, and this is the pace that it moves at, and that's how much time we dedicate to this, and that's how much time we do that before we move on to something else. Yeah, it's a slightly different discipline to what I'd been used to, sort of like growing up in telly. But then I started as a performer on movies, which you'd be a day player, so you'd come in and you'd see what was going on, and you'd talk to the coordinator, and you'd say, what's my role? This is what you're doing. You're with them doing that. Watch out, because there's a whole load of bricks going to drop here. And I mean, so you've got a lot of experience. I mean, doing the sort of like the Supermen and the Indiana Joneses and the Bonds. You got a lot of experience, and you work with some super people and who had time. And that's the great thing about the movies, that you have time to get your stuff together, but also to form relationships, good working relationships with the technicians around you, who would give you good advice as to how to handle what was going on as far as they were concerned. It was a process which a lot of consideration went into beforehand. Not you get a phone call, I could come down to the studio tomorrow, we want you to pull off a thing, and you say, okay. But whatever it was, I've never suffered from status anxiety. I've never suffered from, I don't really mind what it is that I work on, and don't really, I mean, whatever it was fine.
Because looking at your work, you say, there's those action films that are so iconic at the time, but there's also SEO Trot and Mamma Mia, which must have been very different, hopefully good fun jobs to do.
Well, that was me in a safety capacity. That's the great thing about stunt coordination, is that sometimes you just get called to turn up because it says you have to in somebody else's contract. So I had a great time. I got to work with one of my heroes, absolute heroes, Dustin Hoffman. I got to work with him and look after him, look after his personal safety, look after his safety generally, and the safety of cast and crew when they were working around him. suggest and advise on the best possible ways, because he's a octogenarian now, possibly, and I'd hate to guess, but there's certain frailties that come with people of that age, and you have to really, really be careful how you look after them, how you support them, how you deal with them. Mamma Mia again was a safety, a big safety gig, just to kind of stop people walking backwards off cliffs, and make sure that the right safety is in place, water safety, height safety, a lot of big cast, a lot of dancers, and just looking after them generally.
Also, another film which I hope was good fun to do was The Meaning of Life with the Pythons. How were they to work with?
I work with Terry Gilliam, so yeah, sort of like the genius that is. I mean, I did the Voyage of the Crimson Assurance Company, when the office block turns into a galleon and they go off on the high seas of commerce, and then they throw all their executives out of the window. I was the first one to go, and working with him, and then trying to look after the pirates, who are all septuagenarians and octogenarians themselves, actors of that have kind of been around for a long time, and that was an important time. That was an important time, working on films like that and learning from people like him, seeing how he worked. I mean, all you wanted to do was please the director, really. That's what you're there to do. You just want to do your best for them. But that was an interesting experience. I enjoyed it. Mm-hmm.
And who would have been the stuntmen that you would have learned from?
I was very lucky. I had such good stunt coordinators to learn my trade from. I had Vic Armstrong. I did 5 or 6 movies with Vic as performer. On his stunt team, exacting taskmaster, but knew his onions. You can always tell Vic's films when you look at them, because you know where the safety is. He's a very safe man. Peter Diamond, who's sadly no longer with us, he always had safety at the back of it and taught you how to look after yourself on set. I had Peter Braham, I had Mark Boyle, I had Paul Weston as my mentors. It was a smashing bunch of guys to have, because they learnt it as they went along and didn't see any problem in passing it down to the next generation. But that generation now is, there's not very many of them left. But they were great guys. They really were.
So by the time you come to be a stunt coordinator, and that was sort of the start of computer CGI coming in, how did that influence what you were doing?
It didn't really influence what I was doing, but sometimes you felt that you were working for 2 governors, because the director would tell you one thing and then the visual effects supervisor would tell you another. And sometimes it got a little bit confusing. The worst thing, and we've had our ups and downs, with vis effects and stunts, because vis effects think that they can boss stunts around, and stunts are a little bit kind of resistant to that. But I think we've solved most of our differences now. I mean, I don't think you can walk onto a movie set, without encountering at least 50 of them. There's, remember, my daughter, who's a stunt performer, she did a lot on Game of Thrones. I remember her ringing me saying, "Dad, the studio's full of guys with computers." I said, "Yeah." And she said, "But there must be 50 of them." I said, "Okay, don't worry, just do your job." Yeah, it's become an industry all on its own, whereby, but you have to really kind of stand on a little bit, and you have to be respected in your right as a stunt coordinator to be able to say, "No, sorry, we're not going to do it like that. We're going to do it like this, because this is the way we've set it up. And if you don't like it, let's go back to the drawing board and start all over again." So yes, they used to think that they could push us around a little bit, but I think now that the honours are probably kind of even, we are respected, and the respect is returned. Early days were a bit tough. Especially when they got to sit in the shade with their laptops and their Rohans, and we were out there in the desert in the middle in about 45 degrees heat, pushing extras around so they could get their composites. That was a tough one, but anyway, it was fun. We're together on it now.
And a more recent film, which I think probably had less CG, was the Dad's Army film he worked on.
Yeah, it's one of the last ones we did. It was great. I mean, working, doing that. I mean, it was. I mean, the film was kind of almost, I don't know, it was kind of like thrown together. I mean, it was a difficult. I don't think it was a particularly easy shoot, because we were up in East Yorkshire and North Yorkshire on the coast, and yeah, it rained a lot, a lot, but there again, you have actors of a certain age who have to be looked after, and then you have to make your calls and say, no, I think we really need a stunt double for him, and we need a stunt double for her, and it all depends on how are we going to sort the action out on this. Sometimes we didn't have time to shoot what we planned to shoot. The day was over, because it was I remember it being very, very heavily scheduled, the film itself. I've not actually seen it, so I don't know what the result was.
Having worked on so many iconic series and films, is there one that particularly stands out?
Ooh, that's a nice question, actually. I mean, they all had their moments. They all had their moments of joy. We had, I think, Temple of Doom was probably a high spot as regards a performer for me, because I didn't just get to go to China and to Sri Lanka. I also did a lot of work back in the studio. That's when I thought, wow, is it always going to be like this? The answer to that was no, but it was at that time. It was a great time to be alive, great time to be a stunt performer, and that was one of the films that I worked on with Vic Armstrong. Yeah, after 40 years, sometimes you think that there is, my body must be in pieces, but it's actually, as I say, I have actually been very, very lucky, and I've been rehabilitated, really, because I had terrible problems with my neck because I landed on it a couple of times. I had terrible trouble with my hips. But I recommend to anybody that if they have, stage performers, dancers, athletes, stunt performers, anybody that's abused their body all their lives, is that there is hope. And for me, it comes in the form of thebodycave.com. It's a fantastic little organization of stunties and movement coordinators and yoga specialists to rehabilitate the joints of the body. And it's important to relate that to people that come after me, that they can find somewhere that they can go. I mean, a lot of people have trouble with their backs, stuff, especially a lot of people have trouble with their necks, a lot of people have trouble with their hips and their shoulders. Those are the main ones. But thebodycave.com, go and see my mate Jesse and he'll sort you out.
Well, on that note, I'd just like to say thank you very much for your time, Gareth.
Thank you. It's been fun. I've enjoyed it.
You can tweet along and join in the conversation using our hashtag Who's Unsung Heroes. Don't forget to click like and subscribe so you can receive notification of future episodes.
I'm joined now by, I think, one of the few people who can say they've not only been a Dalek, but played the Doctor, which, as I say, is a unique claim amongst all sorts of other interesting supporting artist work and Doctor Who work. So I'd like to introduce Philip Roy. How are you, Phil?
Hi, Alex. Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. How are you coping with lockdown?
Not too bad, thank you. I just sort of plodding on, really. And you okay with it all?
Yeah, not too bad. I've grown a stupid moustache just because. What else can you do? You know, I grew a beard and then just thought, oh, I've had enough of this now. It's getting itchy, so I thought, well, I'll just keep a big 70s porn star moustache. So,
yeah,
sort of things you do to keep sane, isn't it?
Yeah, something to be working on anyway.
Yeah.
But I suppose a good place to start in terms of Doctor Who was your first experience of the show, which was The Bells of St. John alongside Matt Smith. How was that getting the part? Was that quite exciting?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, part of the reason I got into background work acting was to get on Doctor Who. You know, once I realised I was in Cardiff, so that was ideal, and there was a company that you could join and would book you as background artist. That was the obvious route for me to do. So it took a while. A couple of times I think I got booked and then the schedules changed, so then I got released and never rebooked. So it was frustrating knowing that you might have done a Doctor Who and then you didn't. But then I eventually got on booked for The Bells of St. John, and the character, or what I call the character, we were playing unconscious passengers on a jumbo jet. I don't know if you remember the scene, but I think there was some sort of signal sent out which made this plane about to crash, and everyone on board was unconscious. So basically there was a lot of pretending to be unconscious while the plane is crashing, moving, so a lot of this sort of thing. So the back of my head, that's all you saw, like most of the passengers. But I mean, it was great, you know. Matt Smith was there, Jenna Coleman was there, and we filmed it in RAF St Athan. They've got a full-size aircraft jumbo with the wings removed, and I think I got a feeling they train for stuff like how to exit the aircraft, because there was a smell of smoke there, so I'm guessing that they would fill it with smoke and test, you know, how people react and that sort of thing. I'm just guessing anyway. But great to finally tick that box after so many years, you know. It's good. But Doctor Who's quite hard to get on. It tends to be that once you've got onto it and done an okay job, they tend to sort of trust you and think, okay, we'll use that person again. But I know that there's lots of people that have been background artists for years who've done everything but never got on Doctor Who. It's a strange one. It's a strange one. Yeah.
So once you'd got that first part, you were then in the caretaker, or almost in the caretaker, should I say?
Yeah, I think obviously there was one in between, wasn't there? The big 50th. But the caretaker, yeah, again, I got booked on that. And we were booked to play parents in the parents' evening scene, walking into the gym. But I think because of where I was in the queue, just as I was coming through the door, they shouted "cut." So I knew I wasn't really going to get seen on that. But it was a nice one. It was only a day filming on that, and I got to meet Peter Capaldi, even though he wasn't actually in that scene. I'm sure you've heard this about Peter Capaldi before, is that he tends to sort of hang around the set, and he comes in and says hello to people because he's a very friendly guy. So he just walked around saying hello to the crew, and was passing me, so caught my eye and came up, shook my hand. So that was nice.
But as you mentioned, between those two parts was the 50th, and as a fan, it must have been very exciting to be involved in it in some shape or form.
Yeah, absolutely. The funny thing about that was the agency rang me up and said, "Are you available next Wednesday?" And I said, "Yeah." They said, we've just got to check a few things. We'll get back to you." And then about a day later, they rang me and said, "Are you still available?" I said, "Yeah." They said, "Okay, the only thing is they want you to shave your sideburns," because, I'm quite attached to them. So I said, what is it? And they said, "Oh, it's Doctor Who." And obviously I knew that they were filming the 50th at that point. So immediately I was like, "Yeah, I'll do it. And they said, "Okay, you're going to be doubling for someone." So I thought, oh, great. So in my little Doctor Who mind, I started thinking, well, doubling. Oh, well, now I've heard the Zygons are back, and obviously they need to have a copy of someone back in the spaceship so they can. So I thought, oh, perhaps it's something to do with that I'll be, the back of an actor who's walking. So told to turn up to BBC Rothlock Studios at a certain time. So went in, they said go into the cafe, which is where most people meet, and then bumped into some other well-known SAs, Mickey Lewis, Scott Stevenson, who I knew. I said, "Oh, you're doing Doctor Who?" Yeah. So sat down, said hello, made my introductions, and then they said, oh, do you know which Doctor you're playing? And I said, "Excuse me?" They said, "Oh, didn't you know we're all doubling for one of the previous Doctors?" I was like, I can't believe this. So, I mean, very quickly we sort of worked out, obviously there's an older chap there, so he was going to be playing William Hartnell. And then you looked at the height in the build. And I thought, well, I'm only 5'8", so it's either going to be Patrick Troughton or Sylvester McCoy, I'm guessing. And yeah, it turned out to be Sylvester McCoy, which was great. So basically the way it worked was we went into hair and makeup because we had to be fitted with wigs, and then we had to wait till 5:30 until the Doctor Who experience ended, because we were actually using the costumes from the Doctor Who experience, so we had to wait till that finished so they could port over the costumes. So that was interesting. I mean, we're all in the dressing room putting on these costumes and thinking, Sylvester McCoy actually wore this. So hugely excited. And then they put little letraset coloured dots on our faces at certain points so they could key in a photograph of the original actors, which anyone who's seen the 50th special will know that scene at the end where they're all stood in a semicircle looking up at supposedly Gallifrey. And that's how they did it. So it's our bodies. If you look closely, you'll see, I think the Troughton Doctor doing this with his hands, which Pat obviously did. So it's not a static photo. We were actually there live, but obviously they superimposed the photographs of the original actors. And then from the back, if you look from the back, they actually change it's quite a weird one, because you see them from the front and they're in a certain order, and then they change from the back, and we're in a slightly different order. We move around slightly, so I was stood next to someone different from the back. So yeah, but great, you know, just a wonderful experience. You know, I think Matt Smith and David Tennant were already filming the end of something, or so we were just told to sort of shuffle in and stand in the corner. And of course, at some point, David Tennant looked over and saw, you know, because obviously he's a massive Doctor Who fan, saw all the previous Doctors in the costumes, and just this massive grin came over his face, and he started nudging Matt Smith and started pointing, and yeah, it was just delightful to them, you know, when we came on set. David Tennant, I mean, normally there's a strict no photographs, you know, no cameras on set, no photographs. But of course, David Tennant gets a little bit more leeway. So he was there snapping away. Matt Smith enjoyed it as well. And then they brought John Hurt on, just a legend of acting. So, I mean, what a great day for people like me and Mickey Lewis and Scott Stevenson, you know, to play those parts, you know, just a dream come true, really. You know, I mean, if you're lucky if you get on Doctor Who. And you may not even get on camera, or you may just be a huge crowd, but wonderful to be on it and say you've been a part of it. But, you know, how many people could say they've played Doctor Who on screen? It's, yeah, I still have to pinch myself now. It's wonderful, yeah.
So would that have just been one evening's worth of work then?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we would have been called for around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then by the time we got through hair and makeup, just hanging around then, really waiting for the costumes, and then we put on the costumes. So I suppose we would have started filming around 6:30, maybe 7 o'clock, and then the filming in total would have taken not more than half an hour, really. Couple of takes. But the great thing was, Nick Hurren, who's a very nice director, I've worked with him on Sherlock after that. He had this idea to pipe in some very sort of gentle mood music, and obviously there's a lot of dry ice, and so we were told to look up at this point on the set, which is just basically a black wall, and imagine that we're looking up at Gallifrey, not to move about too much because obviously they needed to key the photographs on. Yeah, and it helped. It helped that I think quite a few of the background artists doing these parts knew about Doctor Who and knew the different Doctors. So, like I said, you know, a chap called Richard Roberts was playing the Pat Tratton character, so he did the thing, you know, twirling, and I grabbed my lapels, you know, in a sort of slightly Sylvester McCoy way, you know, just because I knew that's the sort of thing that the McCoy character would do, you know. So I think little touches like that helped, which we weren't really given any direction from that point. Just basically stand there, look up at Gallifrey, be slightly wistful. But I think the music helped, and obviously you've got this huge crane camera coming in closer. You obviously can't look at the camera, but you're aware of it coming in, you know. So you do get that sort of feeling of what you're trying to give in terms of emotional, even though it's not going to be your face, but just body language and things like that. And obviously they're centering more on Matt, John Hurt, and David Tennant. So, you know, it's more for them that what they're giving to their performance. But obviously the music helps, you know, and it's not often that happens because most stuff is post-production music and things like that. But obviously they could film it silent because there's no dialogue. So yeah, great. Yeah, just a really great experience. And then luckily, about a week later, I got another phone call and they said, Phil, would you play, I don't think they named the parts, but would you play a crowd scene? And it turned out to be the scene of the attack on Arcadia. So I played an Arcadian then, and we filmed that at Mam Hillard Industrial Estate, which is Pontypool way. It's an old series of buildings which they don't use anymore. I think they train. I've passed there when they've been training riot police because they've got a big outdoor area. So yeah, it does get used for filming. I filmed an episode of Casualty on there, so that was great as well. And luckily, it was a night shoot, but while it was still light, they picked about 5 of us to play Arcadians who survived. So there's a scene in the 50th special where you see Arcadians emerging from the rubble after the Dalek attack, and I was one of those guys. So you get to see my face a little bit more on that, because obviously on the attack of Arcadia, it was just mayhem. People running about, explosions going off, Daleks, lasers, but really great. I mean, we must have run down that little track about 25 times, you know. But I've talked to Danny Hargreaves, the special effects guy, on another series about it, and he still says that was probably the most exciting thing, and one of the things he's most proud of, because there was such a lot going on, you know. And those big petrol explosions were big. You know, they were. I mean, obviously we were in no danger because these guys are experts. But yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on. It's just fabulous. And that was 2 days. That was 2 days night shoot to get all that. Yeah. So you would start filming as soon as it went dark, really, and then we would get released about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. Because obviously it wasn't just us. They had to film the stuff with. Actually, on the nights that we were there, the doctors weren't there. They used doubles, because you see from the back standing. So those weren't actually David Tennant and Matt Smith and John Hurt. They used body doubles for that. Yeah.
But to say, as well as playing the Doctor and another Time Lord, you've played their arch nemesis, the Daleks. Yeah. And that was probably a slightly longer involvement with that episode as a Dalek operator.
Well, the funny thing about I was booked to be on Asylum of the Daleks, and then literally, I can imagine how I was cited, but I didn't. Yeah, it was only a couple of days before I knew it was to play a Dalek, and then they rang me up the night before and said, "Oh, sorry, Phil, we've got to cancel you because there's a height issue." Apparently, as you know, in the old days, the smaller you were, the better, because the Dalek's quite small. But they said, "Oh no, you're not tall enough." So I was massively disappointed for that. And then about a year later, when I had to reapply for the background agency, I found out that they put my height down as 5'6", when I'm actually 5'8". So I missed out on all those Dalek episodes simply because they got my height wrong. But I think the caveat to that is that the reason I got the Sylvester McCoy role in the 50th was because on paper our heights matched. Now I've met Sylvester and had a photo with him, and I'm about 2 inches taller than Sylvester, so I'm guessing he's around 5'6". So I think that's the reason that I got the Doctor role. So yes, I missed out on some of the Dalek roles, but then I got to play Doctor Who. So swings and roundabouts. But yeah, eventually they did for the two-parter Capaldi episode, Magician's Apprentice, and which is familiar. Obviously, they had all the old Daleks back, and they called me and said, "Would you do that?" So yeah. So and basically, when we went in to the set, which was amazing, they picked some of the normal Dalek operators for the bronze Dalek, the modern Daleks, simply because they'd used those Daleks before. But basically, for the older Daleks, they said, choose which one you want to, you know. So it was like a mad scramble. So I knew in my mind, I thought I'd like to be in, you know, the Dead Planet Daleks, because they are quite classic. But because of the size, they're slightly smaller. Obviously, the classic Daleks are smaller than the new bronze Daleks. they are quite cramped and they're hard to move. I think the Dalek that I was in was one of the Andrew Beach Daleks from the exhibition, and they were static props. And I think the crew had adapted them so they could be movable Daleks. But the problem with that is when you get the new modern Daleks, anyone knows how you move the Dalek. You're basically sat on a seat and you pedal with your feet. Well, in the newer Daleks, you've got the whole of the perimeter of the Dalek to move your feet, so your feet can move quite a way, so you can get some good quick movement. Well, with the Andrew Beach Dead Planet Daleks, literally there was a small hole cut in the bottom, so literally your feet could only move about that much. So it was very hard to move them because you couldn't get any traction. So they said, right, can you just move across from one side of the studio to the other? So I moved at a snail's pace. And they said, can you move any faster? I said, well, no, not really. I can't move my feet. So they basically sort of moved me into a corner where I was monitoring machines a bit more like that. And then the other problem with that Dalek, because they were up against a time scale, was normally inside the Dalek you've got like a stick which you can pull down to make the eye stalk go up, and you can also turn the head with this stick. Well, the Dalek I was in didn't have the stick, so if you wanted to, and they wanted us to move the head so you could get some movement, so if you wanted to move the head you had to sort of scrunch up and scrape your shoulder and move the head with your hand, all the while pressing the button for the lights and then trying to move the gun stick and move the Dalek as well. I don't know, have you ever seen the Vulcan who gets killed in the transporter accident in Star Trek: The Motion Picture? And when you see him in the transporter, he's like this. That's what it was like. And the other problem with it is they make you wear almost like a balaclava, like a sock with two little eyes cut out, obviously in the wrong place, so you can only get one eye moving. So you're in this thing which is hugely cramped. You're trying to do four things, with two hands, and then you think, no, I need to move the eye sock. So then you have to sort of scrunch and scrape your shoulder up and do that, and then you have to scrunch it back and move the gun. There was a point which I thought, even though I've always wanted to play a Dalek, there was a point which I thought, I'm not sure I can stand this anymore, because it was so claustrophobic. And I just had to sort of go into this sort of Zen state where I calm myself down and just constantly breathing, and eventually I just sort of overcame that panic. But to be fair to the crew, anytime there was more than a couple of minutes where you wouldn't be filming, they would take the top half off so you could get a little bit of air. And Andrew Beach, I didn't know, I obviously knew of Andrew Beach, but I didn't know who he was by sight. And he was helping, because that was his Dalek, he was helping me climb out and get in. And yeah, a lovely guy, just really helpful on the day. And it was just a great experience. We did our scenes with Missy and Clara. I didn't do any scenes with Peter Capaldi, but as I was saying, he does love to come on and have a nose around. So while I was in the Dalek, he came like a kid in a sweet shop, because he saw all these Daleks. He came up to me and said, "Oh, who's in there then?" I said, "Oh, hi Peter, it's Phil." And he said, "How you doing, Phil? You're right." He said, "You look great. You look like Mary Quant," because of the 60s thing. So yeah, just a really nice experience, And then the second day I did on it, I think, was filming the bit where the Daleks are all going haywire because of, and all cracks appear, obviously CGI cracks in the floor. So we just had to move about a bit more as if we were turning and in a state of flux and being affected by whatever was killing the Daleks. But by that time, they had actually put the stick in, so so it was a little bit easier. I didn't have to scrape my shoulder so much, so I could just do it from there, and yeah, just a lot easier, But yeah, that's the last thing I've done on Doctor Who, really. Yeah, it's just the luck of the draw, really, whether you get called to do anything. I've not done anything with Jodie, with the Jodie Doctor. I did a self-tape audition for a couple of lines on the Tesla Edison episode, but that's about it. Yeah, but great fun, Always good to do.
On the note that you also had a fantastic time being a Doctor and a Dalek. Hopefully you're back in the next series at some point. I'd just like to say thank you very much for your time, Phil. It's been an absolute joy to talk to you.
Oh, it was nice to talk to you, Alex.
Thank you for watching tonight's live launch. Regular episodes go live weeknights at 6 p.m. from the 25th of May, and will also occasionally feature as part of our regular virtual convention, Time Space Visualiser, which returns this Saturday.